Hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to the Game of the Day presentation for round 10 of this year's British Chess Championships. The game I'm going to present is a pivotal one and possibly will decide the destination of a major prize at the end of the championships. It's the game between Zhou playing white and R.Pert playing black. And it was a very interesting example of the Sicilian Dragon. Well, Yang opened with 1e4, and R.Pert employed an interesting move order in the opening. He played the hyper-accelerated fianchetto. If you intend to play a normal dragon, this is an interesting way of proceeding because it avoids a lot of white's awkward lines involving bishop b5. I suppose to keep this independent, white can play, for instance, c3 here, or he could, after d4, c takes d4, take back with the queen. As black, if you play this way, you have to be prepared for both those continuations. But as long as you're satisfied with black's chances in that line, then you can certainly play this way. Yang decided just to play the regular knight takes d4, and now Pert went straight back into the Sicilian Dragon, having avoided a lot of white's most boring lines, mainly associated with that bishop b5 check move. So we've got a mainline Yugoslav attack where on move 9, white has to decide what he wants to do. Does he want to play bishop c4? Does he want to castle on the queen side? Or, as here, does he want to play g4? A move with which Karpov had great success at certain times during his career. g4, well, white's trying to get the normal kingside attack together. He can often set up a positional squeeze with this move. And I suppose the only drawback with it is that it leaves the white king in the middle. Statistically, black's most successful response has been the slightly surprising bishop e6. I mean, if you didn't know this variation, you'd instinctively shy away from such a move because it seems as though with a simple knight takes e6, white can count on the advantage. But as we'll see, that might not be the case. Now, white has a choice to make. Yang did take on e6, but of course white can continue with the normal h4. This is a very traditional move in the Yugoslav attack. Or he can simply castle on the queen side. But as I say, in this game, Yang decides to take on e6, black recaptures, and only now does white castle on the queen side. So we've got a fairly unbalanced position here where both sides have got some pawn weaknesses. How easy is it for white to train his sights on the pawn at e6? Well, actually, it's not that easy. Black can usually defend that pawn more times than white can attack it. Probably an ideal setup would feature the bishop on f1 coming to h3 at a convenient moment, putting pressure on e6. But that's not that easy to arrange. And meanwhile, white is also nursing some pawn weaknesses. The position of the pawn at f3 is less than ideal. And clearly that can be a target for black's forces. Black only needs to move his knight to e5, and already that pawn's under attack. And that's exactly what Pert did. White plays bishop e2. Well, once white plays that move, of course, it's much more difficult for him to attack the pawn on e6. So, all fine at the moment. And despite the fact that white's got the bishop pair, another unbalancing feature in this position, black's got some active play on the queen side. Queen to c8. A very respectful move, but still theory. Black is angling for knight c4, which is a typical dragon move. And he also eyes up the pawn on e6, should that pawn need protection. h4, still theory. Black brings his knight back to d7, again uncovering fire against the pawn at f3. And this is a pretty well-known position. Well known to dragon specialists. And I've no doubt at all that Yang had prepared for this game. He could have expected that Pert would play the dragon, although perhaps not with 2g6. Now, in the game, white played f4. Very sharp, but that's the way this variation goes. h5 is also a very dangerous move, and I wonder how Pert would have proceeded against that. The interesting point is that knight takes f3 here is answered by the stunning move knight d5. And, well, black might struggle to deal with this unusual knight move in the centre. I'm not going to get too involved in the theory, but let's say after h5, black can also play knight c4. Instead, in the game itself, Yang Fan decides to play f4, encouraging the knight into c4. White takes it off and now plays e5, trying to jam black up in the centre. Okay, well now we reach another critical point. Virtually every move in the dragon is critical, and this one is equally important, because the pawn on e5 really does stifle the bishop on g7. Black wants that dragon bishop breathing fire in the early middle game, and white just shuts it down. Obviously, if black takes on e5, then white's just going to take on d7. That's no good at all. So Pert plays, I would say, the first really undragon-like move, but probably necessary. He moves his rook over to d8 to protect the knight, preparing to take on e5. So after that move, white's got to release the pressure, and he does so by taking on d6. And now Pert, who came into the commentary room after the game and described this encounter, thought that knight f6 was a good move for black. And it's certainly a very interesting way to proceed. I think in this position, if black takes on c3, I mean, that is definitely an alternative. White takes with the queen and angles for some sort of endgame where after h5, he's got significant pressure. Black was pretty reluctant to go for this continuation because, as you can see, it's difficult to find counterplay, and white's not only got pressure against d6, he's threatening to open up the king side and maybe play rook h6, double the rooks. This could be uncomfortable for black. So black does not want to submit to a passive position. He plays knight f6. Again, we've reached a very interesting moment in the game, as Yang Fan decides to play queen to g2. There's definite counterplay here against g4, but what happens in this position if white takes on e7? Here we see a typical situation where one guy sacrifices the queen for two rooks. Well, it's not really a sacrifice, but in this case, let's see what happens. White's queen is removed. He takes on f8, check. Black takes back with the king, so as not to render one of his minor pieces passive. White takes with the rook. Black takes on g4, and this is quite an awkward position for white because his bishop's attacked. Once the bishop moves, let's say gobbles the pawn on a7, now black takes on c3. And we reach an interesting position where white's got two rooks, but his king's very open. The bishop's attacked, black's threatening mate, and black's got a very strong knight on g4. So all in all, white does well to avoid this position. Although, I must say, after bishop c5 check, king e8, rook back, it's not totally clear that white has too much of a disadvantage. I mean, he can certainly play the position, let's say after check, queen a5, bishop d4. Once he's got that bishop anchored in the centre, he might be able to defend this, but the queen is very good at picking off loose pawns, and especially with an open king, this is probably why Yang Fan avoided this continuation. Well, that's something for the theorists in the future. White plays queen to g2, black took on d6, and now the pawn structure was brought back into shape after rook takes d6, e takes d6. White played rook d1, black played d5, and now white brought his king to b1. Well, this is a position where really white would like to play bishop d4, but then I think knight takes g4. And this is an interesting position. Should white play queen takes g4 and then take on e6? Probably he should, but certainly not knight takes g4, bishop takes g7 when queen takes f4 check is good for black. Well, in the game, Yang Fan decided to play king b1, and the point of that is to be able to move his bishop. Black plays b5, and now white plays knight e2. A good move defensively, but it does allow the black knight into a very aggressive square. We got the impression during the game that actually white was slightly losing the thread of this encounter. He hasn't achieved the attacking position which he would like to have done, and black is now getting on top in terms of the initiative. So white moves to block the long diagonal. Well, again, this is an interesting position, and Pert decides to go active here with e5, and as the game goes, this turns out to be a very good choice. There are other moves, but e5 activates all the black forces. F takes e5. Well, clearly knight e6 was a candidate move, but now I think e takes f4. Looks very good for black. If white takes on f8, black takes on e3. And the attacking chances that black has against the white king are considerable. So Yang Fan takes off the pawn. Black recaptures with his bishop. And now h5. Black plays a5. White takes on g6. And now rook to d3. Well, if we see the way the game goes, maybe white should have preferred queen h3. But after knight f2 here, takes, rook takes, black is well in the game, as you can see. So rook d3, trying to cover his king. And now bishop takes d4, and it turns out that white has overlooked something. It's easy to make the mistake Yang Fan made in this game. Let's just see the ideas. If white takes on d4 with the rook, then rook f1 check wins. White has severe problems with his back rank and the looseness of his pieces. After bishop c1, the simplest win is to take on c1 and then take on d4 with an extra piece. Meanwhile, after bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, black has a stunning win here with rook f1 check. And it's possible that this was the move Yang Fan overlooked. It's a crusher because if white takes that, we go knight d2 check. The rook is pinned. Queen takes f1, forcing mate. A very nice combination. So white is down to weakening his king position, trying to bail out with b3. Knight c3 check. And this is a very awkward move for white to meet. In that, if he goes king b2, we go knight d1 double check, which wins. If he goes king c1, then I think we just take on e3, again with a winning position. If he goes, let's have a look at this, rook takes c3, then I think just rook f1 check. And again, black wins. So white is down to king a1 here. It's really getting desperate. And now Pert finds a tremendous finish. He sacrifices his queen with queen takes d3, and then he plays bishop takes e3. And the combined force of black's three pieces versus the queen means that white fate is sealed. And please note the white king in the corner has no escape. White tries the desperate queen g3, and now Pert finds a very nice, elegant finish. He plays rook f1 check, king comes to b2, rook f2 check, forcing resignation. As after queen takes f2, black doesn't even need to give up his knight. Meanwhile, after king takes c3, black has the lovely b4 checkmate. And that was the end of the game. So the dragon is still in business. It always promotes a sharp encounter, and this game was also a very interesting example of this fiery opening. So we move on now to the last round, and R.Pert finds himself on board one with the white pieces against Jonathan Hawkins. Let's see what happens today.